in the heart of an African village, where mornings began with the aroma of corn roasting on the fire and drums echoed in the distance. There was a hall unlike any other. Amina's Hall, located on the main street, among vibrant fabric stalls and tropical fruit vendors. The small space seemed modest, but held something inexplicable. For many, it was just a salon where hair was transformed with almost magical dexterity. For others, there was something disturbing. Amina, the owner of the salon, was young and beautiful, with long black hair always covered by a blue scarf, almost as if she wanted to hide something. His hands were quick, firm, and moved as if they had a life of their own. All he had to do was sit in his chair to realize that time seemed to speed up inside. Within minutes, women came out with perfect cuts, perfectly aligned braids, and radiant faces. There were no mirrors, not even a small one, but no customer complained. Amina had talent, no one could deny it. Even so, one rule remained clear and non-negotiable. No reflections were allowed in that space. Nia, a young woman with big eyes and a restless spirit, watched everything with growing curiosity. She was a person who saw details that went unnoticed by others. As the women laughed and talked inside the room, Nia noticed something else. Amina always worked in silence, her eyes downcast, her face pale, as if she was carrying an invisible weight. After finishing a cut, she would let out a deep sigh, almost like someone who narrowly escapes mortal danger. Nia couldn't ignore that strange feeling that hung in the air. How could she be so good without ever looking at her own work? Nia murmured, leaning towards her friend Sila, who was laughing carelessly beside her. Nia, you think too much. Amina is just talented. What woman wouldn't want a gift like that? Nia didn't respond. A woman came out of the salon at that moment, smiling as she ran her hands through her braided hair. But for a second, Nia noticed Amina's gaze at the door. A fleeting, almost empty look, as if the hairdresser looked through people and nodded at them. That hall hid something, Nia could feel it. When she returned home that night, the weight of that doubt accompanied her. The village was already silent. The full moon bathed the surrounding palm trees, casting long shadows on the ground. As Nia lay on her straw mat, she felt the air grow colder. A breeze came in through the window, carrying the smell of burning incense. She turned around, uneasy, and then dreamed. In the dream, Nia saw herself walking through the empty hall. The floor was dark and sticky, and the sound of a distant drum beat in time with his heart. A deep, echoing voice resounded in the air. Don't trust the shadow that follows you. It cuts, but it exacts a high price. Nia turned and saw a figure appear before her, an old lady with wrinkled skin like the bark of an ancient tree. His eyes were white, but they saw deep into the soul. She was wearing a white robe and holding a mirror covered with a red cloth. You are close to something dangerous, girl. There is no priceless gift. Look for the truth in the reflection, but be careful. The shadow lurks. Nia tried to ask something, but the old lady disappeared like dust carried by the wind. Suddenly, he felt a presence beside him, an icy breath touching his face. The floor opened, and Nia woke up with a start, her breathing quick and her hands sweaty. The dream seemed too real to be just a figment of imagination. She felt something in her heart, a truth that needed to be discovered. Why did Amina's salon have mirrors? What did that shadow that followed her mean? That morning, Nia wasted no time. She got up early and walked to the woods at the edge of the village, where few ventured. There lived Binti, an old spiritual lady, known for her enigmatic advice and ancient wisdom. The path was long and covered in thick roots, as if the earth itself tested whoever dared enter that place. Upon arrival, Binti was sitting under a tree, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. She looked at Nia without surprise, as if she had already expected her. You came to look for answers about Amina, didn't you? Asked Binti, in her hoarse and firm voice. Nia approached, swallowing hard. Yes, Mother Binti. I had a dream. You were there. It talked about a shadow that takes a toll. Binti stopped grinding the herbs and looked deeply into the girl's eyes. Amina made a pact without knowing it. The spirit that held her demands silence and obedience. He keeps her prisoner, but no one sees the invisible chain she carries. Mirrors are the key because the reflection reveals the truth. But be careful, Nia. Challenging a spirit takes an even greater toll. Benny got up and walked to a small box. From inside it, he removed a small, antique mirror covered with a red cloth. The edges were carved with unknown symbols. Take this. It's a special mirror. It can capture what is hidden, but you must be quick. The shadow does not forgive anyone who tries to expose it. Nia held the mirror carefully, feeling the object heavier than it looked. Something inside her whispered to go ahead, but doubt also planted its seeds. Was she ready to face something so unknown? As she left the woods, the wind blew strongly, as if something invisible was watching her every step. Nia felt the old lady's eyes on her back until she disappeared into the trees. His decision was made. Amina's salon was more than just a place for perfect cuts. It was a place of secrets, and Nia would not rest until she found the truth. Nia had always been known for her restless curiosity, a flame that never went out, even when the answers led her down dark paths. He had grown up in a home where the tangible and the invisible lived side by side. His father, Jamari, was an excellent hunter, known for his silence and precision. From him, Nia had learned to watch, to wait, and to act at the right moment. His mother, Naya, was a healer who understood the whispers of the wind, the secrets of the earth, and the murmur of spirits. Naya said the world was more than what the eyes could see. Those words never left Nia's mind, who had grown up noticing what others ignored. Shadows that moved when they shouldn't, whispers in the afternoon winds, and presences that went unnoticed. The morning after the disturbing dream, Nia woke up determined. Her heart beat with a purpose she couldn't explain. The small village was already awake, with the sound of children playing and vendors shouting prices at the market. The air carried the smell of heated palm oil and spices. But even amid the liveliness of the place, Nia felt a weight. Something wasn't right, and it all started in Amina's hall. The room was full when Nia arrived. Women sitting on wooden chairs, waiting for their transformations, chatted excitedly. The room was small and stuffy, with the smell of coconut oil and burning incense hanging in the air. The client's braids reflected Amina's skill, who worked in silence, her face rigid, her gaze low, as if avoiding seeing more than she should. When Nia entered, Amina paused for a brief second, as if she had sensed her presence before she even looked. The silence between them only lasted a moment, but it was enough for Nia to feel a chill run down her spine. Why aren't there mirrors here, Amina? Not even a small one for the clients to look at the results? Nia asked with a firm voice and challenging eyes. She knew her question seemed simple, but it carried so much more. Amina hesitated, her hands, always so sure, trembling slightly as she braided a client's hair. She didn't look up, but her voice sounded firm, too cold for the lightness of the question. Mirrors are vanity, Nia. Here, only real beauty matters. The trust you have in me is worth more than any reflection. Nia tilted her head, unconvinced. He observed the small beads of sweat that appeared on Amina's forehead, the way she avoided looking anyone in the eye. She worked too quickly, as if she needed to finish before something caught up with her. Every movement felt forced, almost painful. Nia felt that Amina was not alone there. Something accompanied her, like a shadow stuck to her hands. "Why are you so tired, Amina?" Nia continued, in a lower tone, almost like a whisper. Amina stopped, her face paled, and for the first time, her eyes met Nia's. They were deep-set eyes, filled with something that seemed like a silent scream, a cry for help hidden behind a mask of control. "If you have nothing to do here, Nia, I suggest you leave." The voice came out sharper than Amina wanted. The hall, which had previously been full of conversations, fell silent for a moment. The customers looked at Nia disapprovingly, but the young woman didn't care. Something stronger called her. She left the room without saying another word, but her heart knew there was something terrible hidden in that place. That night, As the village shrank beneath the starry sky, Nia went to the woods. The path was dark. The rustling of the leaves sounded like whispers, and the cold wind seemed to want to push her back. But she continued. Benny, the old spiritual lady, was the only one who could help. Benny's small mud house was in the middle of the trees, surrounded by herds, stones, and protective objects. When Nia arrived, the old woman was sitting in front of a fire, stirring a thick broth with a stick of wood. I knew you would come, Nia. His voice was hoarse, but it carried the strength of years. Benny needed no explanation. He looked at Nia with cloudy eyes and said, You've already seen what's in her salon, haven't you? Even without mirrors, you notice the shadows. Nia knelt down beside the old woman, her heart pounding. What's happening to Amina, Mother Benny? There's something attached to her, isn't there? Benny nodded slowly, as if the weight of that truth was hers too. She is not alone, child. An ancient spirit helps her, but at the same time imprisons her. He guides her hands, gives her the talent that everyone admires, but steals the life she has. This hall is a prison. Every braid, every cut is a strand of energy he drains from her. He demands silence, Nia, because the truth is the only thing that can set her free. Nia looked at the fire, where flames danced like living shadows. How can I free her? How can I face something I can't even see? Benny slowly got up and walked to an old trunk in the corner of the house. From there, he took out a small mirror wrapped in a red cloth. As he handed it to Nia, the object's weight felt doubled, as if it carried something more than its own reflection. This mirror is special. It not only reflects, but reveals. With it, you will see what no one else sees. But be careful, girl. The truth fights to be seen, and the spirit knows this. It will resist. It will be necessary courage, speed, and faith. Don't doubt yourself. Nia held the mirror tightly, feeling a warm energy pulse through it. Something had changed. She was no longer just curious. Now, she carried a purpose. As I walked back to the village, the wind whistled through the trees, as if something invisible was watching. Benny's words echoed in her mind. The truth fights to be seen. Amina's salon would never be the same again, and Nia knew that journey was just beginning. The next morning, Nia woke up before the sun came up. The sky still dyed a dark blue. The restlessness in his chest didn't allow him to sleep any longer. The small mirror that Benny had given her was kept in her bag, wrapped carefully in the red cloth. She touched it lightly, feeling the strange weight it carried. That object was not common. It was a weapon and, at the same time, a shield. Nia knew she was entering dangerous territory, but Amina's tired face never left her mind. The hairdresser was trapped in something much bigger than herself, and Nia couldn't ignore it. When he arrived at the hall, the village was already buzzing with life. Children ran between the fresh fruit stands, and women carried full baskets on their heads, laughing loudly. Still, Amina's salon seemed out of step with the joy of the place. The worn walls, the air stuffy and heavy, as if something invisible clung to each person who entered. The entrance to the hall looked like a dark mouth, ready to devour anyone who dared to pass by. Nia took a deep breath and entered, with the mirror hidden in the leather bag she had slung over her shoulder. The hall was full. Women of all ages sat in the chairs, their hair being combed and braided with precision. But the silence inside was uncomfortable. All that could be heard was the sound of Amina's quick hands, working tirelessly, and the subtle rustle of threads being pulled and arranged. No one seemed to question the absence of mirrors. No one noticed Amina's vacant gaze, her deep circles under her eyes, and the way she seemed to fight against her own body. When Amina noticed Nia standing at the entrance, her hand stopped for a moment. It was so quick that it almost went unnoticed, but Nia saw it. Amina's breathing became heavy, her lips pursed tightly. She didn't say anything at first, just went back to braiding a client's hair, but her voice sounded like muffled thunder when she finally spoke. "What are you here to do, Nia? There's nothing to fuss over here." Amina's voice was thick. It wasn't anger, but something deeper. It was fear disguised as irritation. Nia didn't back down. walked to an empty chair in the corner of the room, and sat down calmly, as if she didn't feel the weight of the atmosphere crushing the air. "I just want to braid my hair," Nia replied with studied calm as she removed the scarf from her head and loosened her voluminous hair. Amina's gaze was an invisible knife that cut her, but she didn't look away. Amina wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to Nia. Each step echoed, even on the dirt floor. When he was behind her, he began to untangle the strands with almost mechanical speed. Amina's hands seemed to work alone, but Nia felt the tension in her movements, as if the hairdresser was about to collapse. For a moment, the room felt colder. A cold wind came through the cracks in the windows, and the voices of the other customers became quieter, as if they too felt the change in the air. Nia took advantage of the silence and whispered, just enough for Amina to hear. "Why are you afraid of reflections, Amina?" The question hung in the air like a knife about to fall. Amina's hands froze for a second, too tight against Nia's hair. It was only an instant, but enough for Nia to notice the fear in her touch. "Don't mess with what you don't understand, girl," murmured Amina, leaning closer to her ear, her voice low and husky. "Get out while you can." The warning sounded more like a plea, but Nia didn't respond. She could feel something invisible flicker in the room, a presence that stirred, irritated by the mere mention of the word reflection. Suddenly, the environment changed. The wind stopped completely, as if the world outside had stopped. The room grew colder, and the heavy air made it difficult to breathe. The other customers, oblivious to what was happening, remained quiet, as if the silence hypnotized them. Nia glanced at the darkest corner of the room and thought she saw a shadow move, too fast to be human. Her heart sped up, but she kept her expression steady. Amina resumed her work, her hands shaking, and sweat now glistened on her forehead. The young hairdresser looked exhausted, as if Nia's simple resistance was draining her strength. His lips moved slightly, as if he was murmuring something, perhaps a prayer or a request for forgiveness. Nia realized that Amina was fighting something that no one there could see, and this only strengthened her resolve. "I'm not leaving, Amina," Nia murmured softly, almost like a challenge. "Not until I know the truth." The words were spoken in a soft tone, but carried with firmness. Amina stopped again, the comb in her hand almost falling out. She closed her eyes for a second, and then went back to work without saying anything else. Nia knew she was being watched, not for Amina, but for something that was hiding inside, something that seemed to writhe in anger. The mirror in her bag pulsed as if it were alive, emitting a strange heat that she could feel against her skin. The weight of that truth, still invisible, was beginning to become unbearable. But Nia would not run away. She knew the spirit knew of her presence. That was just the beginning. The sun had already said goodbye when Nia returned to the room. The village was plunged into nighttime silence, and only the rustle of leaves on the palm trees accompanied their hurried footsteps. Amina's hall, now empty and dark, seemed even more sinister. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch, as if something invisible was breathing along with the ancient wood. Nia took a deep breath. Her fingers clutched the mirror, still wrapped in the red cloth, as if it could protect her from whatever was waiting inside. Amina was sitting in one of the chairs, her hands clasped in her lap, her head bowed. She didn't turn around when Nia entered. He seemed to have sensed his presence before he even heard the footsteps. "What do you want, Nia?" muttered Amina, her voice low, lifeless, like someone who had already accepted her own destiny. Nia didn't respond immediately. The weight of that question echoed in the empty hall. She closed the door carefully and walked to the center of the room. The air inside was thicker, as if each breath required effort. Nia felt the strange heat of the mirror pulsing against her skin, as if it were alive, waiting for the right moment to act. She stopped before Amina, her eyes determined. "I want the truth, Amina," Nia replied, her voice firm but calm. "I know there's something here, something you won't tell anyone." Amina finally looked up. Her eyes were sunken, red, as if she hadn't slept in days. For an instant, Nia saw a flicker of fear there, something the hairdresser was trying to hide. "You don't know what you're saying," muttered Amina, looking away. "Go away, Nia. There is nothing for you here." Nia didn't move. With a slow gesture, he removed the mirror from the bag and unrolled the red cloth that covered it. The hall seemed to shake for an instant. A gust of cold wind entered through the cracks, extinguishing the flames of the candles, leaving only the pale glow of the moon to invade the space. Nia lifted the mirror and pointed its surface toward the hairdresser. Amina's eyes widened, a scream stuck in her throat. She stood up abruptly, as if she wanted to run away, but something was holding her in place. The mirror captured the truth that no one else could see. In the reflection, Nia saw what tormented Amina. It was a figure made of shadow, tall, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. His hands were long, thin, and bony fingers, extending like claws over Amina's shoulders. The spirit did not move, but its presence was overwhelming. He was there the whole time, guiding the hairdresser's hands, trapping her in an endless cycle. The spirit let out a deep roar, a deep, piercing voice that seemed to come from the depths of the ground itself. "No, you can't do that," shouted Amina, her voice choked with panic. She covered her ears, as if she could block out the sound of the spirit's voice, but the roar only intensified. The reflection in the mirror shone, and the spirit twitched as if the light was burning it. "This is the price you pay, Amina," said the spirit, his voice echoing like muffled thunder. "You asked for talent and I gave it. In return, you belong to me. Your silence feeds me. Your pain makes me stronger." Nia didn't move the mirror. The heat from the object now burned her hand, but she held it tightly, focused on the spirit trying to resist. Amina, unable to bear the pressure, fell to her knees on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know. I just wanted to be the best hairdresser," sobbed Amina, her voice fragile, broken. "He promised talent, and I accepted. I accepted without understanding what I was doing." The spirit let out a hoarse laugh, each note filled with contempt. "And now it's too late, Amina. The truth is a blade, but you can't cut it without bleeding. There is no escape." Nia approached slowly, the mirror steady in her hands. His eyes looked at Amina with compassion, but also with strength. "You're not alone, Amina," Nia said, her voice strong and clear. "That thing can't control her anymore. What's in this now?" The spirit twitched again, as if Nia's words hurt it. The hall began to creak, as if the walls themselves were complaining of the presence of that truth. The ground shook slightly, and the air became so cold that Nia could see her own breath. But she didn't back down. The mirror seemed to gain weight, shining more brightly as the spirit roared in rage, its claws trying to escape the reflection that held it. Amina looked at Nia, her eyes filled with despair and hope at the same time. For the first time in years, she saw a way out, a chance to free herself from that pact that consumed her. Nia extended her other hand to her, as a gesture of support. "You need to fight, Amina. Only you can finish this." Amina took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. She looked into the mirror, her face determined, like someone finally facing her own demons. The spirit screamed louder, the entire room pulsing with the dark energy it released. But Nia didn't give in, and Amina didn't look away anymore. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The hall shook, the sound of the creaking walls mixed with a low roar that seemed to come from deep within the earth. A dense, living shadow detached itself from Amina, stretching into inhuman shapes across the room. The spirit, furious of being exposed, advanced with impossible speed, covering the floor and climbing the walls as if it were part of the room. The air became so heavy that Nia felt her chest tighten, each breath a struggle against the oppressive environment. Holding the mirror with both hands, Nia kept the reflection pointed at the spirit. The surface glowed intensely, as if the object itself was fighting against that entity. The spirit, a misshapen figure with glowing eyes and elongated claws, roared in pain as it was struck by the reflected light. His deep, guttural voice echoed throughout the room, resonating in every corner. "You shouldn't have done that, girl," the spirit barked, each word a blow to the environment. "This place is mine, and it belongs to me. The shadows advanced towards Nia, but the mirror repelled them like a barrier. The heat from the object burned her hands, but she would not give in. Memories of Benty's warning echoed in his mind. The truth fights to be seen, but resisting the shadow has a price. Nia swallowed, her voice shaking but firm. Amina, fight. Tell him you don't need him anymore. Amina was lying on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, like a child trying to protect herself from a nightmare. Her body shook and sobs escaped between her lips. The spirit writhed around her, wrapping its shadowy arms around her, as if trying to suffocate her in despair. She can't abandon me. I am the reason for your talent, of your fame. She is nothing without me, roared the spirit, his voice rising in fury. Nia took a step forward, even though her knees were shaking. Each movement felt like a fight against the ground itself, as if the shadow was draining his strength. He lies, Amina, Nia shouted, her eyes fixed on her friend. You were always capable. He only used your fear against you. Don't let him win. Amina slowly raised her head. His eyes were teary, but there was something different in them now. A spark of determination that seemed to have been reborn. His hands, previously shaking, steadied themselves on the floor. She took a deep breath and started to get up. The spirit roared louder, the shadows growing denser, as if trying to crush her. No, he shouted, his voice reverberating like thunder. You promised me. You owe me. I don't want you anymore. Amina shouted, her voice coming out firm, even through her tears. You used me. Leet, you said I needed you, but all you did was imprison me. Her words were like blades, cutting through the surrounding shadows. The spirit roared again, this time in despair. He writhed as if in pain, his misshapen form retracting in convulsions. Nia held the mirror even higher, the light now burning the spirit like a living fire. Light reflects truth. Shadow no longer reigns, shouted Nia, Benny's words coming out with a force that seemed to come from something bigger than herself. The mirror shone so brightly that the entire room was filled with light. The shadows tore like old fabric, and the spirit let out a deafening scream, its forms being sucked into the reflection. Light enveloped every corner, purifying the space from the darkness that inhabited it. Amina fell to the ground, her strength finally exhausted, as the spirit was pulled into the mirror. He tried to resist, his claws tearing through the air, but it was too late. With one last roar, he disappeared, and the hall fell silent. Nia took a deep breath, the mirror now cold in her hands. The light inside it dimmed, and the object looked like just an ordinary mirror again. She looked at Amina, who remained on the floor, panting. Her face was bathed in tears, but there was something different about her now. The weight she carried seemed to have disappeared. He's gone, muttered Amina, her voice weak, but full of relief. She raised her face, looking at Nia with grateful eyes. He's gone. The hall was different. The air, once dense and oppressive, now felt light, almost fresh, as if the environment itself had been freed along with Amina. The walls stopped creaking, and the silence was a good silence, no longer filled with fear. Nia knelt down next to Amina and held her hands gently. You're free now, Nia said softly. The shadow can't hurt you anymore. Amina closed her eyes and let out a long sigh, like someone who had just woken up from a deep nightmare. For a moment, the two stayed there, just listening to the sound of the wind outside, a wind that finally seemed to be at peace. The pact had been broken. The truth had won. Days later, Amina's hall was almost unrecognizable. The once dark and worn walls were painted with shades of ochre and blue, which reflected the sunlight like a welcoming embrace. Small circular mirrors with hand-carved frames adorned every corner, shining like jewels in the soft morning light. For the first time in years, that space felt alive. There was color, movement, and a sweet scent of fresh flowers mixed with coconut oil that filled the room. The customers' voices echoed happily, amidst laughter and conversations that seemed to have belonged to that place again. The hall, once silent and gloomy, now pulsed with a new, liberating energy. Amina, with a yellow scarf over her hair and a light tunic that made her movements loose and graceful, worked with the quick and sure hands of someone who, for the first time, felt the weight of life dissipate. She braided the hair of a little girl who laughed and twirled a bead between her fingers. Amina's eyes, once dull and tired, shone with something she thought she had lost: peace, freedom. It was as if each thread she touched carried a new story, one that she wrote with her own hands. Nia entered the room without announcing her presence. She stopped at the entrance, taking in what had changed. It wasn't just the decor, but the atmosphere, the light, inviting air that now filled the space. His heart was filled with satisfaction. She saw Amina smiling at the girl, laughing along with her, and that image was enough to know that what they had faced was worth it. That hall, once an invisible prison, had become a refuge of light and truth. Amina noticed Nia's presence and, with a wide smile, walked towards her, drying her hands on her apron. Her face looked younger, as if years had been given back to her. "Nia," Amina said softly, her voice firm but full of emotion. "You came." Nia nodded and let her eyes roam the mirrors. The reflection showed only beauty and life now. There were no longer shadows lurking around the edges. "It looks beautiful with the mirrors," Nia replied, a smile forming on her lips. Amina held her hands affectionately, squeezing them gratefully. His eyes welled up, but this time they were tears of relief, not despair. "Thank you, Nia," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved my life. Today I work with my own hands. I feel it." Nia saw in her eyes the truth she had been searching for so long. Amina no longer needed to hide. She no longer needed the weight she had once accepted without understanding. Now every move was his. Each creation, each braid and cut carried its own essence. It was the kind of freedom that no spirit or promise could steal again. On leaving the room, Nia stopped for a moment and took a deep breath. The sound of customers' laughter continued behind her, like an echo of hope that had finally found a home. As I walked back to the main street, a light breeze blew, ruffling the colorful fabrics on the market stalls. It was then that she saw her. Binti, the old spiritual lady, was sitting under a distant tree, with her face illuminated by the filtered light of the leaves. She watched Nia with that wise look, as if she knew everything that had happened, even without being present. Binti nodded lightly, a serene smile on his wrinkled lips. Nia stopped for a moment, nodded back, and followed her way. You didn't have to say anything. The gesture was enough. Nia knew that the truth had been released, and with her, Amina had found her peace. The village, which once carried whispers over the hall without mirrors, now vibrated with a new story. A story of courage, truth, and liberation. And as the sun shone stronger over the small hall, reflected in the mirrors that now took their place, Amina continued her work, free and light like never before. For her, each new customer was no longer a burden, but a celebration. Life had again been hers, and Nia, watching from afar, knew that as frightening as the truth could be, she was the only one able to illuminate even the deepest shadows. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.